covering the game at its highest competitive level and otherwise, has been Iain Carter, the BBC golf correspondent, for more than 20 years. This year, he will be covering his 90th major championship. He has authored multiple books. We'll be talking about his new book coming up as well. Pleasure to welcome Iain to the program. My friend, it is good to see you. I'm curious what your initial reaction is to those words of Rory McIlroy.
Well, first and foremost, you've made me feel very old. Good morning to you, Matt. Yeah, I mean, the first words that he said in that segment were, "It's all pie in the sky." And that has to be the big concern for anyone who'd like to see a global tour, the game united, and it traveling around the world at the very highest level. I think we're a long, long way from that occurring. And I think you could sense that Rory McIlroy is at the moment, given the way that the game is shaping up at the moment. It is fractured. It's very difficult to see players wanting to, when they've got this sort of run of signature events, $20 million purses without having to even find their passport. It's a very attractive proposition if you're based in the United States. But certainly speaking from this side of the pond, it's a very, very attractive proposition to think that the game could be truly global and have these guys playing against each other regularly all around the world.
How shocked were you, Iain, last June when it was announced that the PGA Tour, the DP World Tour, and that LIV were trying to become as one?
I was very, very shocked, and I wasn't alone. I remember vividly when that email came through at 3:00 in the afternoon, and I was actually having a late lunch at the time, and it felt like it was some kind of April Fool's joke, wasn't it? The thought that these deadly enemies could come together in the way that was being suggested then. And actually, it's quite an interesting thing to do now, is to go back and read that press release and read what was being envisioned at that point, because the whole situation has moved on massively since then. Obviously, the investment from SSG, we just still don't know how the negotiations that are, we're told, ongoing between the PGA Tour and the Saudi Arabian PIF are going to play out. But the landscape really has changed an awful lot since then.
And couldn't the argument be made, Iain, that the game of golf at its highest competitive levels has actually improved, not necessarily from the product that is being offered to the people because the stars are on various tours, but from a player's perspective? Have they not benefited from LIV coming on the scene with increased purses in these signature events?
Oh, in financial terms, they certainly have. There's no doubt about it. But the one word that kept coming up, certainly in the last 3 or 4 months, has been sustainable. How sustainable is this level of remuneration on both sides of the fence? Because LIV ultimately will need a return on their massive investment. They've got very, very deep pockets, as we know, and they can wait longer than most investors can. But nonetheless, you know, the billions that are going in from SSG into the PGA Tour present another question as well, because there will be a demand for a return on that investment. And it's hard to see how that can be maximized when the game is fractured. And that applies to both sides of the equation, to the LIV side and certainly the PGA Tour as well.
You know, notwithstanding one's opinion of Saudi Arabia and the sovereign fund, the public investment fund, has the sting of those who would be against it for whatever reasons they have, but has that sting diminished by the fact that this public investment fund is diversifying and is investing in so many of the world's major sports at the highest tier?
Well, it goes across the board, doesn't it? It goes across, you know, if you, depending on which taxi you decide to ride in, that could well have Saudi Arabian investment in it as well. And that diversification certainly, I think, does kind of dilute that potential feeling of unease at doing business with Saudi Arabia. But from just the golf point of view, the very fact that the PGA Tour have decided to try and do a deal with Saudi Arabia, that changed the landscape massively. And we've heard John Rahm talk about that in the wake of his move to LIV. I think it made it easier for him to do that, and do that in the hope, if not the knowledge, that potentially there could be a coming together that would allow him somewhere down the line to return and play the PGA Tour events that he would want to play. So, as I say, the landscape has changed. It was changed massively by June the 6th, and the aftershocks have continued to an extent that has profoundly changed the landscape going forward. The problem that the game has is that we don't know definitively what that landscape is yet. And I think there are more aftershocks to come.
Cannot wait to continue this conversation with Iain Carter. Amongst his acute observations is the reality that he is coming out with a new book as well called Golf Wars, which I want to get into in some detail with him. I also want to ask Iain about some of the things that are going on in the golf world today. These rumors about Hideki Matsuyama leaving the PGA Tour, Anthony Kim potentially coming back into the competitive circle. Does that have an impact? Is that sending any ripples across the global golf scheme? Iain, do you think that have the major championships actually benefited from this golf fractured landscape?
I think they're certainly benefiting from it at the moment, Matt, because they're obviously the only 4 events where all of the world's best players come together. And I think that gives them an extra level of interest that no other golf tournament can possibly command. And, you know, we have the Players' Championship coming up in a couple of weeks. It remains a fantastic event on a fantastic golf course and one that all PGA Tour players want to win. But it is no longer the first gathering of all of the world's best players all in the same place, which is what its calling card was for so very many years, certainly when it's been played in that March date. That will happen at the Masters, which doesn't need any extra kind of bigging up, does it? But it gets that dividend. But I think it's a short-term issue in many respects until we get some kind of resolution over official world golf ranking points and that kind of thing, because ultimately we're going to be seeing majors that aren't going to have some of the world's best golfers in it. Taylor Gooch is someone who was the most successful player on LIV last year, is certainly a player who is perfectly capable of gracing a major championship field. And it's not happening for him at the moment because of the world ranking situation. And that, again, is one of the downsides of the current fractured scenario. But overall, yes, the majors are the places where we're going to see the world's best players getting together. And as a result, they have secured a dividend from the current situation.
As a golf correspondent, what does it mean to you to hear that Anthony Kim may be back on the scene as early as this week?
It's interesting. I filed my piece today for the BBC Sport website, which didn't touch on LIV or anything really. It was a look back at some of the feel good stories of the weekend. And the editor came back to me and said, "Oh, what do you think? Is Anthony Kim going?" And the editors are really keen on this story because I think for the reasons that you outlined, 10 minutes ago on the show, he's someone who does generate an awful lot of interest. He had a great deal of charisma when he was at the height of his powers, and now he brings the intrigue of whether he can compete 12 years on from the last time that we saw him. So it's a big story for this week. I received footage on my phone of him practicing in Dubai, so that's another tick in the box that suggests that he will be appearing in the Middle East this week in the LIV event at Jeddah. And it's going to be fascinating to see how well he can compete. But, you know, this is happening at a time when LIV are stepping up the pressure as far as world rankings are concerned. And then you say, well, hang on a minute, you're giving a place in your tournaments to someone who's not played for 12 years. And yes, he had a great career when he was at the height of his powers. But how does this reconcile with trying to be and prove that you are worthy of world ranking points? And that puts a big question mark, I think, over his participation in terms of the wider golfing firmament, certainly this week. But it's a story that brings intrigue and interest to the game. There's no doubt about that.
And what of that Australian Golf Digest report that Greg Norman is saying that their biggest target right now is Hideki Matsuyama? Are you putting a lot of stock behind that?
Well, it doesn't surprise me, and certainly, in the other periods of live recruitment, Matsuyama's name has not been far away from discussions, and there was a point when it actually felt like a surprise when he didn't go there, because he is such an attractive commodity, being a Japanese player and a Masters winner, and now a winner again on the PGA Tour of one of the big signature events. It would be a massive coup for Liv to be able to get him. It would be a very expensive one as well in terms of the money that would be needed to lure him, I'm sure. But again, that's another watch this space, isn't it? And certainly Greg Norman loves to lob these hand grenades in to generate that interest, discussion about Liv. It's a classic PR move, isn't it? Even if there's not that much substance to it, here we are, we're talking about it. And that's exactly what Greg Norman wants.
Whether we're talking about Matthew Pavone and his victory now on the PGA Tour, Semi Välimäki gave a gallant run this past weekend against Jake Knapp. Where does the DP World Tour fit in this jigsaw puzzle of, again, to use the phrase, the fractured landscape?
Well, it's a good question. And, you highlight two players there. I'll throw another one in there, Bob McIntyre, who showed up well in Mexico this weekend. And the players who have graduated, Nicolai Højgaard being another one coming through the DP World Tour and then securing a place on the PGA Tour. They have shown the quality of their golf and that they are, perfectly capable of not just surviving, but thriving on the biggest circuit in the world. So that speaks to the quality of golf that is played on the DP World Tour. But where does it fit in the firmament right now? Is it in all reality just a feeder tour to the PGA Tour? Could it be a feeder tour to Rory McIlroy's World Tour idea? Yes, I certainly think that is a case. But Guy Kinnings will be taking over as the chief executive officer there when Keith Pelly steps aside at the beginning of April. And he has a massive task on his hands to maintain the relevance, I think, of the European Tour. And let's face it, this is at a time when Europe has been celebrating a fantastic Ryder Cup victory. There is an awful lot to look at on the DP World Tour and celebrate at the moment. But and it has been the case, whether it's been formalized or not, for the last 10, 20 years. Any player that does well on the DP World Tour is then looking to move on to the PGA Tour or be snapped up by Liv. So it's got to find its place within the firmament, and it faces an awful lot of challenges, I think, in that process. But it is still backed by big sponsors, big television deals, and it has the Ryder Cup. So I don't think all is lost by any stretch of the imagination.
Your new book coming out in April, Golf Wars, Iain. This one really intrigues me because the S obviously is a dollar sign. And I'm really curious about the final paragraph, the final chapter, because this very much seems like a story that is continuing to develop. How much for you was this book, first and foremost, about kind of laying it all out there so that people could understand how we arrived at the complicated situation that we're in?
That's exactly what the book is about. It's a commentary on what has happened in the last couple of years that really has brought this unprecedented turmoil to the game. And I've also tried to bring into it, the golf that was happening in that environment and the way that golf has been coloured. The prologue to the book is very much Rory McIlroy against Patrick Reed at the Dubai Desert Classic. And that was an epic duel that was coloured totally by the environment in which the game is being played at the moment, because obviously Reed had gone to Liv, and it was a tournament that McIlroy wanted to win perhaps more than any other outside his major successes because of who was on that leaderboard and the antipathy that was going on at that time. And it's extraordinary. I was writing that pretty contemporaneously, and then to be, by the end of the book, talking about McIlroy saying, well, Jon Rahm has to be allowed to play in the European Ryder Cup team. And, the complete about turn that McIlroy has had over Saudi investment and Live, it's extraordinary. It was a very, very difficult book to write because you just didn't know what the final chapter would be. And as you say, the situation is ongoing. But what I hope is that anyone who reads it is then going to have a good idea, as and when we get to wherever we get, they'll have a good idea of what happened in the background to get us towards that finishing position, whatever that might be.
The book is called Golf Wars, Live in Golf's Bitter Battle for Power and Identity by Iain Carter. It will be available in April wherever fine books are sold. Iain, are you hopeful for the immediate and the long-term future of professional golf?
I've got mixed feelings about it, if I'm honest, Matt. Yes, I am hopeful because this whole scenario has generated so much interest in the game that I think can potentially be harnessed, and potentially with all the investment that's going in, there is a massive opportunity to use that horrible phrase, grow the game, whatever that means. But if it can grow interest in it, then I think that is obviously a good thing. And if more people are playing and more people are watching, then that is what the sport has to be striving for. But I do think that the amount of money that is sloshing around there, the sense of entitlement that you feel from players and administrators, it is moving the game away from the hardcore fans. And it's why I wrote the piece that I wrote today, just celebrating the fact that a delivery truck driver managed to win enough money in Kenya this week on the DP World Tour to be able to sustain his career going forward. I actually really looked forward to the Mexico Open when people were saying, oh, look at the quality of the field, only 4 players from the top 50. What we knew from that tournament last week, and we saw it with the winner, Jake Knapp, was that players were playing to change their lives. And I think that is one of the great things about professional golf. It's why people get interested in it. It's why people feel invested of a weekend watching. And sometimes I think when the fantastic sums of money that are involved in signature events come to the fore, then we're just watching guys who are already extraordinarily wealthy, wealthier than the audience could ever hope to achieve, getting themselves richer. Doesn't quite have the same level of magic. So I think golf faces huge challenges to make that feel attractive. And I think the only way to do that is to have all of the best players effectively playing a world championship around the world. And I'm with Rory McIlroy on that. But also, I go back to what I said right at the start. He said it's pie in the sky at the moment. And that just illustrates how far we have to go to get to that scenario.
Well, however that scenario plays itself out, we will benefit from the reasoned and pragmatic voice and professional voice, such as it is, of Iain Carter. His new book, Golf Wars, coming out in just a few short weeks. Check it out today if you guys get an opportunity. Thank you for your time, my friend. It is, as always, a pleasure to see you, and I look forward to seeing you down the road, the Players or Augusta, as we move forward.